Good morning, friends. We're on chapter 14. Jihadis don't tip. You in Raqqa were like this, said Abu Qatada, shaking his chaste jihadi ass in front of my desk. The Tunisian brother was wrist-bandaged and terrible-looking. His spectacle was inspired by the heated discussion between the brothers and the commoners, including me, of the capital's irreligious past. Our failures were proven by our reluctance to join the jihad and by our obsession with money. He had been told that before the arrival of ISIS, the villas on the Euphrates outside the city had been dark places for indecent nightlife, which Satan, represented by sexuality, alcoholic drinks, and music, attended as his newly seduced victims danced, intoxicated to the vulgar, faux folkloric songs, and squandered their harvest money. Abu Qatada had been in town for a few days, enough time to make him confident, spitting out such a statement. We wished that his wound would heal so that he'd be sent to the front lines at the earliest opportunity. Our heated discussion could be traced back to his bill. He thought we had overcharged him his first 100 megabytes, which had been exhausted by the time he found himself a seat. In truth, he was a victim of his own phone's auto-update setting, but we failed to convince him that his megabytes had been taken by software and not stolen by us. Between the 5 cups of tea and the 200 megabytes, for we had refilled his account with another 100. We charged him 400 Syrian pounds, no more than $2, but that was sufficient to trigger his now sprawling outrage at Raqqa. Abu Qatada seemed to have heard stories like the one about Abu al-Nur, a fat, neatly dressed, beard-combed, tastily perfumed brother from Germany, who once told me that he had wasted $10,000 in 40 days in East Aleppo simply on shopping. East Aleppo was not a particularly extravagant town for shopping at the time, considering that its regular weather forecast was hail of barrel bombs, but he once found himself buying a kilo of bananas for $7 when the price elsewhere was less than $2. People in Aleppo are kabeth, foul, he spat, and I gladly agreed. That Ramadan I suffered the torture of having to wake up stuporous and dry-mouthed at 11 a.m. after long hours of sleeping and sweating in the hot July night, and unable to have so much as a sip of water, stagger over to open the cafe. I was tempted to break my fast, but with ISIS members as customers, I had minimum opportunity. A wake-up cigarette, the enemy of al-Dala, smoothed by coffee, tempted me mercilessly. I needed it to equip my brain for the long, delicate hours of handling the brothers. Not that all of them were fasting. Some of them excused themselves, claiming the dubious justification that they were defenders of Islam, garrisoned at every front. I resisted my thirst for a time by watching Game of Thrones in the blazing heat, until the hall was vacant of Abu Qatada and all of the Abu others. At which point I locked the door, snapped open one of the soda cans, and sank into delirium. When the muezzin called out the Maghrib prayer, the skinny ISIS fighter Abu al-Munthir from Egypt, where he had been imprisoned for radical preaching, limped into the cafe, leaning on a crutch to compensate for his severed left leg. He was housed in Abu Staif's sanctuary too, and was sent in a plateless van to a nearby village to the south every Friday to lead the day's sermons. Abu al-Munthir was short and mean as the acid in his voice. He called for everyone to gather to follow him in prayer in the little space next to the foyer, making sure that Ammar, our daily free bandwidth hunters, the shopkeeper across the street, and his WhatsApp-addicted brother and I joined. We often made excuses to disappear, but when one of us went missing, Abu al-Munthir was sure to investigate at length. To our dismay, Abu al-Munthir's wound would never heal, and he would never be sent to the front line. First time both Abu al-Munthir and Abu Abdullah al-Jazrawi from Saudi Arabia met at the cafe, they didn't seem to know each other. But the second time, Abu al-Munthir made himself comfortable in the little chair in front of my cashier's desk, which sat against the cafe's southern wall next to the entrance, enabling me to look through the windows at the city. He did this on an invitation from Abu Abdullah, who himself was seated next to Abu Adib. Sorry, tongue ties me. Abu Adib, his father-in-law. Abu Abdullah, a member of Al-Hispa and an utter idiot, had very recently taken a bullet in his waist during the ongoing Battle of Kobane, and he was keen to show the wound to everybody. However, on this day, Abu Abdullah was wary, less talkative, and definitely less stupid. Everyone who knew Abu Abdullah al-Hispa knew that he was weird, rude even, and not simply because he followed Torjuman al-Azawerti, the mysterious ISIS Twitter propaganda legend who set a record by having his account suspended 500 times and loudly read every single tweet his eyes rested on, swallowing the sought-after frantic dose. Abu Abdullah continually got himself into embarrassing positions with his thick-minded, utterly unfunny jokes and with the vulgar remarks that provoked brothers he had just met, until someone saved the situation and everyone except him was relieved. Abu Abdullah was married to Abu Adib's second daughter, and they all lived together in the luxurious, confiscated Algas villa, which consisted of 2 residential blocks separated by a garden. Only a few steps from the cafe, Abu Adib had grown daughters, all of whom he married to the Mujahideen, and one underage son whom he pushed to join the Mujahideen. He was a fragile, fastidious, white-bearded man from Aleppo who passed by regularly to pay me the weekly 500 Syrian pounds, the charge for his active night account. Now he was bowing his head in grief as Abu Abdullah spoke. "We heard your daughter Amina's husband has passed away. May Allah accept him," Abu Abdullah began. "Yes, Allah granted him Shahada a few days ago." Abu Abdullah bent forward, lowering his voice further, and said, "This is our brother Abu al-Munthir. He made Hijra all the way from Egypt, mashallah. Welcome, Aki Abu al-Munthir." "May Allah house your son-in-law in Firdis," said Abu al-Munthir. I remained silent, as no one, luckily, seemed to notice my existence behind the cashier's desk. The brothers are advancing against the atheist Kurds Al-Hamdulillah. Now they are already near Ain al-Islam, Abu Abdullah said, using the ISIS name for Kobane, a Kurdish city in the Turkish border. He hesitated, bobbing his head up and down. Abu al-Munthir was given a residence in Al-Kasra, near his mosque. He wants to talk to you about something. "I want to ask for your daughter's hand." Abu al-Munthir's words rushed out. Unsurprisingly, Abu Adib's face reddened, and his eyes widened in shock. Something inside me felt unease, for surely such a conversation was too weird to have in front of me, let alone in this way. She's still in Ida, so it's still early to talk about that. Ida is the 125-day period after her husband's death when a widow is forbidden from seeing strange men, let alone marrying one. Islam forbids even a hint of a proposal during this period. "Of course, we mean when she finishes Ida. We'll talk about that when she finishes, Abu Abdullah." Even with that, Abu Abdullah might have felt that he had overstepped a religious boundary. The 2 men were saved when a group of brothers came for the check. With the cafe's hall crowded, we began to make good money from the fighters, both crippled and able, who were interested in watching high-quality video releases and whose Skype video calls, on the most up-to-date smartphones, of course, made them greedy for bites. Foreign Mujahideen, who came from more modern worlds, were to blame for the swelling smartphone trade, in comparison to the civilians with their ancient Nokias whose internet use was mostly limited to WhatsApp sessions, typing to relatives living in places they could not visit. Abu Stafe brought his own satellite dish eventually, but his building was crowded with over 100 tenants, so everyone who was still ambulatory came to the cafe. Within a few days, we had to provide another Wi-Fi signal to keep up with the demand. Fighters speaking different tongues from different countries and with skin of different colors were all unified in their thirst for infidels' blood and our bandwidth. As I hustled around the cafe, setting up customers and handling complaints, I overheard their constant chatter. They discussed the front lines, the challenges facing Al-Dala, the ignorance of the ordinary people and their Jahiliya habits, and the difficulty of finding brides. People like Abu Adib did their own jihad by offering their daughters to the Mujahideen. Sorry, friends. The sun is coming. Offering their daughters to the Mujahideen, whose marriages often did not last. Mujahideen husbands were usually gone too soon in more ways than one. We seldom saw a fighter at that cafe for more than a few weeks. Large numbers disappeared, and then we would hear from their fellow fighters that they had been killed. We sincerely prayed that God might grant them all mashada. My days were torn between setting up internet accounts for the Jihadis, with the simplest usernames and passwords to save time, and checking the accounts of jihadis, rebels, activists, analysts, and journalists, Western and Arab, on my Twitter timeline. There, ISIS jihadis were bestowed with a bevy of names, each revealing the viewpoint of its user: ISIS, ISIL, the Islamic State, al-Dawla, and when one wanted to show contempt, ISIS's Arabic acronym Daesh. Two worlds fused before my eyes. One, a virtual world full of theories about the apocalyptic nature of the stageless, long-bearded cultist of the black flags and the bag-like black abayas, referred to by Twitter wits as Daesh bags. The other world right in front of me, its would-be champions obsessed with fantasies of expansion and fictional triumphs, dreaming aloud about returning home to be welcomed as liberators in Cairo, Tashkent, Baghdad, and Mecca, smashing crosses and butchering pigs. From rockin' pulpits, preachers preached the Reconquista of Al-Andalus and the battering ram at the gates of Rome, and from Jerusalem a Twitter stalker assured me that life in Raqqa was utopian and that his Al-Dawla brothers were ruthless toward the polytheist, humble toward the monotheist, a phrase he had read in the Quran. I continued my habit of tweeting life in Raqqa, though now, under the present occupiers, I did it in greater secrecy at far greater risk. In those days, I and those around me knew that the nightmare of ISIS would come to an end, but not before killing our dreams. We knew that somehow, if the rebels were not able to put down these jihadis, then, when their danger expanded beyond the borders of Iraq and Syria, the world would lash out with wrath. But alas, the world had no interest in putting an end to ISIS as long as people like us were the only victims. We knew, this time truly, that in the interval before ISIS fell, we would have to survive by every means, smart and dishonest. We also knew that we would eventually be misjudged, presumed to be not ISIS's victims, but perversely its base of support. When guilt weighed upon me, I tried to abandon it on the shore of the Euphrates. At midnight, if by good luck our customers had finally left, we closed the doors and turned off the already dim LED lights. Not to lengthen their battery life so much as to render ourselves invisible to those outside who might want to come in, and thus to maintain our sanity. Our customers were not the sort who abided by the rules of opening and closing times. They believed that they were the rules. Some mornings, when Ammar was sleeping in the kitchen, they pounded on the windows and woke him up, demanding that he open the cafe for them. Some nights they stayed until 4 a.m., preventing our escape. How could we dare say we needed to close? Some of them made us lend them our own phones or laptops if they wanted to make a call, like that Chechen monster who forced me to let him Skype his family from the only laptop we had. The second time he asked, we brought him a desktop computer to use, but soon the cafe's electricity went out. He left in sullen silence, only to come back exactly a week later, barreling into the cafe, screaming at us in Chechen. We couldn't figure out what he was ranting about. When he got violent, when he almost broke my laptop, even in my confusion, I knew better than to respond in kind. I was enough in control of myself to know that an angry reaction would mean my certain death. These men were a band of brothers, and a non-fighter's life for them was worth no more than the surplus share of ammunition it would take to kill him. After 20 minutes of intense Chechen frenzy, as contained as a volcano's lava, his friend, who spoke a disastrous Arabic, with a jumble of butchered syllables and a considerable quantity of saliva, successfully interpreted his madness, telling us that his brother's Skype account must have still been signed in when the electricity cut out, and we swore by God's 99 names that it would have signed out automatically when the computer's power came back on. We demonstrated it, but he wasn't totally convinced. This would not be the last we saw of him. This was not the only conflict for which we had to improvise an urgent response or face uncertain consequences. Like when they thought that the plus signs on the stained glass panels, oh Nayel, you painted them, were crosses, and we had to blot them out with blank paper squares. Or when two Al-Hizbah members, one Saudi and the other Moroccan, both regular customers, began hassling Ammar while he was working. Aki, why are you shaving? Don't you know this is haram? The Saudi remarked, and the Moroccan said that the Ammar looked like a girl in his jeans and his tight shirt. Brothers, years younger than you, are sacrificing their lives in jihad, the Moroccan jeered. Look at you in your prime. Aki, you look soft. The lecture lasted for over 40 minutes. of which maybe 30 were dedicated to the meaning of, "There's no God but Allah." Ammar smirked and said, "Brother, I'm too poor to buy clothes while I'm feeding my family. Maybe you should give me some cash." Of course, he was a liar. He was saving money to buy an iPhone 5S. Or when the door suddenly opened and a belligerent Moroccan's eyes gazed at the village rug and its intertwined patterns with which my uncle had decorated the walls. He understood the patterns to be Masonic satanic symbols, and so we had to remove the rug immediately, with no time for a debate about the ambiguity of art. Or when we placed a bell above the front door to chime whenever a new customer walked in, and Abu Abdal Rahman and countless others, especially that short, fat Tunisian, asked us to get rid of it because the ringing bells was a Christian thing. In that case, oh. In that case, we elected not to act immediately and instead put him off with the argument that it was necessary to alert us if anyone had entered the cafe. But then came the day when he, followed as always by the same group of Tunisian brothers, stormed the door as if it were the gate of Baghdad, and the bell fell in his bare, bold skull. Oh, that skull! Not a single drop of blood spilled forth, but we were saved by the peals of laughter that burst from his own friends, which restored the blood to our veins, and by our offers of free drinks and internet. But we savored the justice. Or when we fought a long war of attrition against Abu Siraj al-Jazrawi and Muhammad al-Maghribi over cigarettes. Muhammad al-Maghribi took the habit of coming over every afternoon that summer. He most often arrived with the Saudi Abu Siraj, who I guessed was about 50 years old. Abu Siraj would park his Toyota Hilux in the garage, and he would always enter after Muhammad. Muhammad was very young, with a tall, taut athlete's build, a wide forehead, and a half-beardless chin. He would put his mobile phone and keys on my table and then walk behind the cafe and leap into the cool water of the Euphrates. The river was known to be tricky around Raqqa. It had swallowed hundreds of lives, not that the young boys who challenged each other to dive from the bridge cared. Neither did Muhammad. Muhammad's childhood and adolescence were very different from his present chosen lifestyle. He grew up in the meadows of the Moroccan north, among the cannabis fields cultivated by his family. Muhammad then had worn a foolish smile identical to that worn by the Muhammad of the present. He'd take out his phone for us and scroll through photos from his past in those fields. He had also lived in Agadir and Fez before migrating to Syria. Muhammad was not like the other ISIS fighters. He enjoyed a pleasant mood and had an adventurous spirit. He knew that we smoked in the empty kitchen and we used as a dump, but didn't mind. In fact, he smiled every time Abu Siraj made his accustomed tour, poking around in search of cigarette packs. Abu Siraj usually dunked the packs in the fresh pool when he found them, until he was certain that the tobacco had been fouled. Then he threw them at Ammar, grinning at his destructive handiwork. We retaliated, of course, by overcharging him. Abu Siraj unknowingly paid for the damage. On YouTube, Muhammad followed the news and videos of al-Dawla's enemies as a form of entertainment, or possibly as a job. He didn't, as the others had, shout ridicule or pray to Allah to enable him to cut their throats. Rather, one night he called Ammar and me to watch a YouTube video of Aleppo rebels singing, "We're in a valley and you're in another valley, and we're in an..." Sorry, friends. "You are in a valley and we're in another valley. Oh, Baghdadi, we're going to oust you." The song continued. "You want a state, go convince people to follow you, but be careful not to alienate them through your actions." He sat on the couch in the corner opposite my desk and examined our faces every time there was a phrase too critical of his group, as if to read our sequestered thoughts, a test of my ability to exhibit apathy even when my interest was excited. Muhammad was interested in Ammar at first simply because Ammar came from Atareb, a small town in the western Aleppo countryside. There, the rebels had fired their first bullet against ISIS. That night in December 2013 put ISIS at odds with the rest of the insurgent groups, radical and moderate. Enmity and long war followed. ISIS accused local Atareb rebels of raping its foreign female members, something that whenever ISIS fighters brought it up, even up in the cafe, usually Abu Abdallah, who made sure to tell every new member that Ammar was from Tareb, mimicking the local pronunciation in his thick Saudi accent, put Ammar in the spotlight. Since Abu Siraj led the way, paid the checks, and drove the car, we joked that he was Muhammad's boyfriend. However, their strong bond was of a different sort, and not one that we exactly guessed until later. One day, when the cafe was empty, Mohammed pulled Ammar to his side and whispered in his ear that he wanted him to be a spy. He asked Ammar to help him bust underground brothels and big fish tobacco dealers in the neighborhood, offering him an irresistible stack of dollars. Ammar told me about the offer, and I, lying, warned him that it was a trap. The boy was thankfully scared enough to refuse. It was easy for Mohammed and Abu Siraj to take in the unwary since they were friendly and didn't care about minor offenses like cursing or Ammar's half-shaved, gel-stiffened, un-Islamic haircut. It was only when Abu Siraj came alone and sat down for a few minutes that we understood something of the nature of their actual profession. We asked him about Muhammad, and Abu Siraj replied that he had achieved Shahada in a recent bombing by the Nusayri regime. This bombing was no doubt the only time the Syrian regime succeeded in hitting ISIS hard, for the building they struck housed Point 11, ISIS's intelligence unit in Raqqa, which was notorious for kidnapping and torture. The Point 11 building was pummeled by a dozen air raids. ISIS lost more than 50 members that day. One of them was Muhammad. That afternoon was the last time we saw Abu Siraj. Of all the many things ISIS had forbidden, smoking was the hardest to control. Nicotine was in the blood of many locals, and one of the very few pleasures that was not traditionally prohibited. Of all the Islamists who ruled Raqqa, only ISIS fought that proper addiction with lashings, imprisonment, and fines. After ISIS imposed its ban on cigarettes, the cafe's dump kitchen became our haven in which to hide and smoke. During one of the many bombing raids, the glass on the kitchen door shattered, and the patches of plastic sheeting we hung leaked the smell of tobacco. One day, when Ammar and our WhatsApp addict neighbor and I were sharing a smoke, the Dutch fighter Abu Suleiman pulled open the kitchen door and breathed in our foggy climate. Only the day before, Ammar had cooked eggs and tomatoes that Abu Suleiman and his best friend had invited themselves to share with us, and we for once dined with the elite European brothers, much to their satisfaction. But that happy time didn't help us now. When he smelled the remnants of our smoke, Abu Suleiman's countenance switched abruptly from white to angry red, and he insisted on inspecting the kitchen. He found 3 packs, but couldn't believe that we were not hiding more until he had rummaged through the spider-webbed interiors of the drawers. He contained himself after a moment, probably recalling the taste of Ammar's eggs and tomatoes, and then began lecturing us on the evils of cigarettes, seemingly without sensing the need to clear his throat. He seemed shocked that these criminal things still existed, as if they were a gateway drug to defying the very existence of his al-Dawla. They certainly were in some cases, perhaps even in ours. "Where did you buy these cigarettes?" Abu Suleiman began. "We don't sell them here anymore. I brought some with me from Aleppo yesterday," the WhatsApp addict lied. "You are not trying to fool me, are you?" he snapped. "All of you smoke the cigarettes he smuggled from Aleppo." "Tell us from whom you bought them, and we won't call al-Hizbah," interjected Abu Suleiman's best friend. To snitch on a dealer meant that you'd be dragged to the Islamic court as a witness if the fighter didn't honor his promise to hide your identity, and they usually didn't. Not to mention the loss of both a rare source of cigarettes and your people's trust. Usually, al-Hizbah monitored a suspected dealer for a long time in order to discover his supplier, one of the big fish traders of cigarettes. Most of the time, they then sent a collaborator to buy from the dealer and thus catch him in the act. Dealers were always suspicious and sold only to people they truly trusted. "Okay," Ammar said. I could sense that he was searching for the right lie to end this debacle. "Vendors don't sell cigarettes in the shop so that they won't be caught. They walk in the street like normal people so that you couldn't guess what they were up to. The only thing that makes them identifiable for us is the suitcases where they put the packs. You'd have to be a smoker to identify them easily. You come close to them and whisper what brand you need. They take you to a corner where no one can see you and sell you just a few packs at a time." Abu Suleiman looked at us in turn, half buying it, half not. "That's how people in Raqqa buy cigarettes," Ammar said. We nodded. "I'll find out about that," he said, and he and his friend withdrew. At the beginning of the month, when the Jihadis first came, the air had felt different. During those first few days of Ramadan, there was electricity 24 hours a day and a caliphate. ISIS shortened its long name to ICE, the Islamic State, to further burnish its prestige. Baghdadi declared himself a prince of the believers, but the majority of the believers didn't give a damn. The media crowned Raqqa the de facto capital, and while believers in the capital barely heard the news, they enjoyed cooling themselves by the fans and air conditioners powered by the new electricity. To celebrate, the Caliphate organized a parade of force consisting of tanks, heavy machine guns, and hails of bullets, even a Scud missile shell they displayed in a long truck. A Syrian fighter jet roared above, and hundreds of anti-aircraft machine guns fired at it, uselessly, from their pale, dusty ground. At dusk, I returned to my new home, the rooftop terrace of one of the buildings my uncle owned, to break my fast. I leaned against the fence surrounding its balcony. A soft breeze, moistened by the river, caressed my hair and gently struck my cheeks. It was a dishonest messenger. Have a good day, friends.